All right, today we are going to talk about the ROI of sustainability. Now, everybody here knows, I think everybody who is present here today knows that sustainability has been around for a long time, but for the last 10, 20, 30 years, it mainly maybe was driven by ethical obligations. Maybe it was a compliance checkbox for different regulations, be it in Europe, be it for large corporates, for example. But maybe some companies in the past also, beside ethical obligations, besides the compliance checkbox, looked at sustainability as opportunistically, as an opportunity maybe to create growth, to create new markets, attack new markets, and reduce costs. Where in the past, a lot of companies maybe could approach that opportunistically. Today, it is a reality. It is a reality in many cases that the effects of climate change, the effects of market realities, the Trumps, the import taxes, the geopolitical disturbances have real consequences when it comes to costs, when it comes to selling sustainable products. So it went from being opportunistic to having to be realistic, embedded in realism, sustainability, and as such, has a need for a linked business case. And that is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how sustainability can actively create these levers for growth or cost savings, be it through a variety of different pillars, be it price premiums, better customer retention, increased resilience, reducing supply chain risk. All these different aspects we're going to talk about, but I'm not only going to talk about that because I'm not the expert here. ClimateCamp is primarily on the Scope 3 data aspect, but when we're talking about the ROI of sustainability, I've invited two people here today from ResultX. The first person is Andries Paesen, who brings expertise in this alignment or creating this alignment between the financial side of sustainability impact and the actual sustainability investments themselves. So he has helped build business cases for these businesses and build different solutions to automate certain aspects of sustainability processes. And I also recently found out you were a piano teacher, or you have been a piano teacher in the past.
Yes, I have been a piano teacher in the past in my weekends. That's a good spot, Martin.
All right, perfect. So welcome, Andries. And then my second guest is Karine. Karine has quite a track record within business and also within sustainability. If I were going to transcribe her LinkedIn, we would lose the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes of this webinar. So I'll keep it short and just paraphrase it into Karine is the ESG author of ROI of Sustainability, what you saw in the first slide. She also wrote a book on the guide to ESG a couple of years before that, which led to the ROI of Sustainability. And today she also helps Andries with bringing advisory capacity to ResultX with all her knowledge as a board member, as a manager, as being a chairman for Amnesty International, working with BDO and different types of organizations. So that is who I have brought here today to talk about the ROI of sustainability. Welcome, Andries and Karine.
Thank you. And also thank you to Martin and the rest of the ClimateCamp team for the opportunity to do this shared webinar. Always fun.
All right, perfect. Then let's talk a little bit about what we are going to talk about. And what we are going to talk about is very simple. Normally, I'm going to do the webinar a little bit different. I did an introduction, and then we're going to dive into the ROI of sustainability. Normally, what I do is I grill my guests with tough questions and nuanced answers. But this time, I'm going to give the floor a little bit because the expertise is much more on the other side of the camera for me. I'll give the floor to both Andries and Karine to dive us a little bit through setting the scene of sustainability, how this business case ideology and the need for it has developed in the last couple of years, and then what these 7 pillars are for leveraging growth from sustainability investments. So they will create a broad scene and give you broad insights. They have done this in many presentations for many different groups of businesses as well. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Obviously, there are many ways that you can apply sustainability investments for growth, but we'll dive a little bit deeper into 3 use cases. 3 use cases we often see demand for or questions about, which is, can I sell products at a price premium, or can I get more money from certain sustainable products, and how do I do that? Supply chain risk analysis, I think, is a very real topic. Droughts, floods, disruptions in logistics and shipping routes, I think, very actual. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that aspect. And then the third one is access to green financing, actually finding the money to fund these sustainability investments. Now, finally, that will take about 45 minutes, and then the last 10 to 15 minutes we will reserve for Q&A. Now, for the people here present, if you have questions, you can ask them during the webinar, but we'll only answer the questions at the end of the webinar. Now, you can paste the questions in chat, but preferably there is also a Q&A section where it's easier for me to then find the questions afterwards. Now, with that being said, I will give the mic, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll give the mic to Karine and Andries to take us a little bit through the 7 pillars of leveraging sustainability for growth.
Thank you very much, Martin. Shall I start, Andries?
Yes, go ahead.
Because I would like to start with a myth. Often when we speak to certain people about sustainability, they say that it is very expensive and that sustainability is something that you have to do out of a moral duty or because legislation gives you no other option than to invest in it. And we believe that sustainability is something that can help push your EBITDA, that can help push your figures. And that's why often when we talk to people, that is also the inspiration of our work. That is why we are doing this. This is why I wrote a book. This is the content of our work. It's working on the business case of sustainability with experts like ClimateCamp. That is the reason why we are having this webinar as well. And it's not just us saying so, also it's been substantiated by profound investigations and research. And maybe we can share a slide on that. It's the Nyenrode University who has done a research. Often I present McKinsey research, but this is a very interesting research because it's about the Benelux. It's about the mid-market, so not only the very big companies, but the mid-market about the Benelux. And it is a study of this year. It was published April 26, so very recently after Omnibus. And there we see that 38% of the people who were of the research, the audience said that 38% has a strong ROI on sustainability. 45% says they have a moderate ROI, return on investment, so good EBITDA from their sustainability efforts. And 17% says, and we have to be very honest about it, that they have no profit, no extra profit from their sustainability efforts. But this means in general that 83% of the companies say that they have a moderate or a strong return on investment on their sustainability investments. So this is really important to know. And where does it come from? Is it top line or bottom line? And that's going to be shown on the next slide. For 36% of the companies, it's both top line and bottom line benefits. So the profit is on both sides. And this is really encouraging to continue our work. 37% is top line benefit, so that means coming from customers, revenue, etc. Bottom line, meaning that costs can be reduced 19%. And in 8% of the cases, it's not measured. And the 8% is also interesting because that means that companies don't even know if it has benefits or not. And we want to explain where the benefit comes from, because it's not magic. We have found and defined 7 levers where this benefit can come from. A first lever is risk management that I will explain. I will give a few examples, but the examples will be in the business cases afterwards, the 3 cases that Martin has shown. The sustainability case, the supply chain case will be on this one. Risk management, we see that many companies don't have a risk register. That means that they are not managing risk. And sometimes customers tell us, yes, but that is no problem. If something happens, we will stick together and we will deal with it at that moment. Okay, that can be very team building, but it's not sustainable, and more things happen. So it is better to build a risk management and to include sustainability in that risk management. We can have a few examples, but the examples will be later during this webinar. We will really zoom into this one because it's really an important one. And you can say that the profit is not immediately there, but yes, it is, because things happen more and more, and it affects sometimes very badly the profit of a company. And if you are prepared, then you can start talking to your insurance company, talking to your bank, talking to your customers, and making sure that you are covered in case something happens. We had flooding in the south of Belgium. Now we are suffering, probably going to suffer a heat wave. This is something that is repeatedly hitting our companies and our people. Talking about our people, we are coming to talent. It is very, sometimes companies underestimate the effect of sustainability on their talent and on their teams. We can, in Belgium, I want to say several things at the same time. So I'm going to start with, in Belgium, we have a problem with sick absenteeism, with people not working because they don't feel well. And we have to work on that, and sustainability can be a lever to help people have a stronger engagement to the company. And this is a direct impact on the profitability as well. Andries and I were in a company a couple of weeks ago where the CEO told us very firmly that his people were really not that much into sustainability. They were not interested. And we went in the shop floor on the blue collar, talking to a few blue collar people. And when they heard we were working on sustainability, someone came to Andries and said, I'm talking for my colleagues and for myself, and I think the management thinks we don't care, but we do care, and please make sure that we are involved in this project. I mean, this was really for us a confirmation that talent is important, and that if you can increase the engagement of people, it has a direct effect on your profitability. A third one, which is often also underestimated, is capital cost. Banks find it very important because they have quota, and for them it's really important that companies are including sustainability in their financing requests. I'm also a trainer at Fabelfin Academy, that is the industry, the sector federation of the financial companies, and they have quotas to meet. So for them, it's very important that in their portfolio, in their company, that that in their investments, they are sure that sustainability is taken into account. And then a last one that I will explain is shareholders. Maybe this is the one that is the most tricky one because it's not immediately measurable. It's only measurable at the moment when a new shareholder steps in or a shareholder leaves. So at the moment of the evaluation of a company, but the capital cost of the shareholder, then the value of the company increases at the measure of more sustainability or not. So this is really a very important one as well.
Yes, and that leaves us three pillars that I will explain to give you also a little break, Karine. Three maybe more straightforward levers to making sustainability profitable for a company. First one being customers. I can imagine that A lot of you participating in this webinar are also encountering sustainability because of communication with your customers that are asking for certain supply chain data, for example, for certain certificates or reporting. So we see that, also customers tend to be more loyal towards companies that are sustainable, because being sustainable matches very well with being a very trusted company and a very serious company that's going to be there for the long term. So it means that you can bind companies longer to yourself as a customer, which is very nice, and has also a direct impact on your EBITDA. The sixth one being circularity. I always explain this one as the classical sustainability, like sustainability was maybe 10 years ago. If you think about electric vehicles, if you think about saving water, all these kinds of things, which are of course very important, they fall under what we call circularity. What can be a very tangible business case in this pillar is, for example, putting a value on waste streams. So we worked with a construction company, and they had some kinds of wastes, and at some point they were paying 500 euros per ton of that waste to get rid of it. And also they had to transfer the waste to the facility where it was going to be processed. In that case, we searched for a business case. We leveraged also the network that we had, and we found a company that makes certain furniture of this waste. And now they're being paid 5 euros per ton, and it's collected at the production plant. So that's quite a difference, and they didn't have to do anything for it, just being connected to the right people. So circularity is one pillar that companies often have a very good view on. They often know that they need to switch to electric vehicles because the total cost of ownership is going to be lower, but there can still be surprises in that lever as well. And then the second one, and maybe Karine, a bit of a sensitive one, is the price premium. So when we start explaining this, we often get the reaction, and maybe some of you are thinking it right now, our customers do not want to pay more for a product because it's sustainable. And we'd say that it could be the case. Not always. We see that in 85% of the cases, it's not true. So you're right, and we are not. So in that case, people do not want to pay more for a more sustainable product because it's a sector with very low margins, or the quality should just be perfect. But we see that in 12 to 15% of the cases, especially in our research, we see that there is a willingness to pay a little bit more for a more sustainable product. Very important side note there is that you have to know very well who your customers are. They have to be segmented very well. And also the salespeople have to offer the sustainable products only to the people that are probably interested in buying a more sustainable product. And if those criteria are fulfilled, we see that there can be a price premium for more sustainable products. If we look at the B2C market, there are some tangible examples like EcoVair, for example, where people, and fair trade or bio, where people tend to pay a bit more because it's a more sustainable product. Voila, and that concludes the theoretic part of the webinar. If you want to know more about this, you can take a picture of the screen, or you can just reach out to us, and we can have a chat about it. And then, Maarten, I can assume that we progress to the part where you grill us with tough questions, right?
Yes, but I'm first going to actually begin. Maybe you can go back a slide. I had the extreme fortune to be at an Scope 3 event earlier this week in Amsterdam. So I can give very tangible examples to this as also very mid to big size corporates. How do you experience this also in ways you would not expect? For example, let's take risk management. I spoke with a very large bottling company, Coca-Cola, who talked about, okay, we have this risk, related to flooding in Bangladesh and India and the Southeast Asian companies. And their insurance company went like, okay, but that's not a problem. Damage from flooding, we can insure that. That's a business risk. We can insure that. It's part of your policy, no problem. But what Coca-Cola ran into was the problem. Yeah, the business impact, okay, some flooding damage is one part of the risk, but the risk is that our people cannot get to the factory. And you cannot insure for productivity to be interrupted because of flooding. Okay, maybe some sort of remuneration exists, but their operations get halted, and that is not something an insurance product might cover. So for them, risk management is much more than just the direct damage that some aspects of climate change does, but also the indirect effects of people not being able to get to work, not being able to support their livelihood, and then thus not coming to work, for example. I also want to give the example of circularity, or not specifically circularity. For people present here today, probably know Decathlon has very big ambitions with circularity, the level of reuse repair aspects within their new business models. They really want to leverage it. But one of the cases that came forward when she was talking about a business case is circularity is a really good business case for countering material dependency. So if you can increase repair, if you can focus on these circular business models, you can make the case of, if we, for example, we need this rare metal, we need this raw materials, which are very hard to get by, or there are in geopolitical, very sensitive regions, then you can make a case for circularity being a way to hedge your bets or to reduce risks related to raw material purchasing. So for her, it's all about circularity, but she was like, when talking to finance, maybe this was an angle which became much more relevant for circularity as a reduced cost in the future. And then the last one I'll give for price premiums, maybe the people here who are in F&B know this example, but for example, Arla pays his or her, or how we would phrase it, pays its suppliers a price premium, so they're farmers, based on sustainability criteria. So, and they have published this very publicly, that they add 4 cents to their milk price, 1 based on carbon reporting, and then 3 on like a different sustainability criteria, where they actually directly pay more for the milk if certain criteria are met. And that is funded from something that is both funded from within Arla as with retail partners. So it's not just Arla paying their suppliers more, but it's also their retail partners, etc., co-investing in creating these price premiums or these increased prices for purchasing goods. So I wanted to give these examples because they're very tangible and that our corporates are dealing with right now.
Another example, Martin, that I describe in my book is Oatly. The milk Oatly, which is nearly triple the price. It is not mainstream, but there is a good percentage of people in a certain market segment where it is mainstream, and people only drink Oatly because it doesn't come from cows, and it's far more expensive than milk from cows. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So in price premium, if you address the proper niche, sometimes you can triple or double your price. But never for the same product, the same quality, the same service, then customers will not pay extra for sustainability. So it's very important to check which niche, which segment, how to market your in marketing. So how you address your audience. Many people think we can charge more because it's more sustainable. No, that will never be the only reason. You have to take a different approach.
Mm-hmm. All right. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe that being said, let's dive into the use cases where we're going to talk a little bit more about 3 very specific use cases. The first one, price premium, as Andries mentioned, very sensitive. I'll in a second give the mic over to you, but I think what's really interesting here is that it's not just a case about pure B2C sales where you can argument our consumers, a certain segment of consumers are sustainability minded, left-wing people, for example, or certain types of people have this interest, but it's much harder in a B2B context because you have much more financial motives at play, many more stakeholders involved in the decision. So maybe price premium is a lot harder to do here, competitive space, etc. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about something you did regarding price premium in a B2B context?
Yes, we have a service company. They have 2,000 employees. The customer requests were very high on sustainability, and at a certain moment, end of last year, it really dropped. Sustainability was an Olympic minimum, meaning that if you had a certain level of sustainability, it was good, and you could not charge extra for sustainability. And at a certain moment, we had an RFP for a really big contract coming in, not from the government, from an international company, and they were very clear. 2% if you measured your emissions. 2% discount on your price. 4% discount if you measured your emissions on the project, and the project was for 3 years. This is a real example. 6% if you measured the emissions for the project. And 8% if you measured the emissions for the project and you made sure that it was a net zero emission on that project. That meant if you were net zero on that project and you could prove it, then you would have won the RFP, and it was really for a big amount. So this is a real example. Unfortunately, I cannot give the name of the company, but and it was this year. So the customer was not expecting this, and it was an important one. Another example is that we have a production facility where it's 10% more expensive to produce, to manufacture products that are more sustainable. Often we see that customers, and they have many channels of sales, customers are not willing to pay that extra. So sometimes the sales guys gave it for free. We can give you the sustainability product for no extra charge, and in return, the customer could not have any discount. We believed it was not the good approach, so we segmented the customers, and there was a proportion of like 27% of the customers who were willing to pay extra, not just drop the discount, but willing to pay extra for more sustainability. And we explained that to the sales guy. Then we found that the salespersons were not able to argue about, to discuss this, to put it into their sales pitch. They didn't have the lip loading, sort of say, how to discuss this with the customer and how to defend this sustainability in that specific segment. So we offered them a lot of tools to defend their that to the proper segments. We listed which companies would pay extra, etc. So often companies think that they can charge more just because of sustainability. That is not the case. If it's the same level of quality, the same level of service, an identical product but more sustainable, in your standard segments, probably it will not work. You have to do a little bit more effort to make this price premium work, but if you do the effort, then you really can see lots of differences. And look at what Nijenrode has found, 36% top line and bottom line benefits, which can make it really interesting to zoom in on that price premium.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Let
and
me
maybe
make...
to,
yeah, go ahead, Andries.
if I can, Maarten, to emphasize the last point, I think that's also interesting for everyone participating to take a little note on, maybe because that's a very main takeaway of the things that we've done the past years. Yeah, for charging a price premium, there are two parties in the room. It's not just a customer that doesn't want to pay a price premium. It's equally the salespeople that need to bring the more sustainable product to the table in a good way. So there, it's maybe a useful exercise if you come to the conclusion that customers do not want to pay for the more sustainable product, to analyze how the sales process is looking, what they're actually telling to the customers, because sometimes this just also stands or falls with the motivation of the salespeople to sell that product.
Mm-hmm. All right. let me maybe pick in on this a little bit. For the simple reason, something I heard a lot about in the last couple of weeks is the necessity for sustainability to be embedded in other departments or in other functions. So you mentioned sales right now, procurement, finance, obviously with the entire ROI question is very important. I know for a fact that you both are also very much of the idea of the vision that sustainability strategy and business strategy is one or is a combined effort, let's say. So here is a good example of, okay, we have the sustainability topic, which is we have investments which we need to sell at a higher price. And then we have the salespeople who then have to translate that to measurable sales, basically. So can you talk me a little bit more, this price premium? You did this exercise, obviously, a couple of times. How high level, how would a company tackle exploring this if there is willingness to pay? And then how do you translate that towards as training salespeople, for example, or embedding that in the strategy? Could you give some insights there?
Yes, it's very hard because it really depends on the company. We have companies with thousands of employees, and we have customers with thousands of employees. We have customers with 20 or 30 employees. So it really depends on the situation. But often what we see standard is that the marketing and sales are not really aligned on sustainability. And that they sometimes miss the go-to market, the segmentation, and the tools to make it really happen. And sometimes it's also a matter of conviction. I have a large company, thousands of employees. I've talked with many of their account managers, so their sales staff, and like 1/3 was not really convinced that it should be a matter that they discuss with their customers. So sometimes it's like what Andries said, it starts with what is the awareness. I don't want to convince people. I want these sales guys to meet their sales targets, to get their bonus. And if we are talking about that, then it opens doors. So you're very right, Martin, to connect this to the strategy. It's very important that the KPIs, everything is aligned, because if you just tell to salespeople, go and sell sustainability, it's not going to happen. It has to be integrated into the bonus system, into how they discuss it. You need to do a few role plays. They need to know which customer is sensitive to what kind of, because sustainability also is very broad. For some companies, it has merely, it is more about emissions. For other companies, the social aspect is important. So it really depends. And you need to equip the salespeople with the proper tools to make it happen in the field.
Yes, maybe to add on that, it sounds very strongly, but there is no such thing as sustainability KPIs, in the view that they should just be KPIs, and that's maybe a second takeaway that we can offer from this webinar for the companies participating. If your company still has a very separate sustainability strategy, then maybe it's time to check how robust it is. And by robust, I mean, what is the chance that sustainability is going to be less important in times that there are budget constraints or the economy is tougher? We saw that also last year after Omnibus, that a lot of sustainability ambitions were lowered. So is there a separate sustainability strategy? That's not always a good sign. And how can that be integrated into the strategy, the one and only strategy of the company going forward? Because that would mean that sustainability is embedded in the strategy and that it will always be on the table, also in times that the economy is tougher or that sustainability is less of a hot topic.
All right. And I'll give one final example, and then we'll move on maybe to the supply chain risk example. I've had the opportunity to listen to a keynote and a panel from L'Oreal, for example, and they talked about, like, what does this mean? It's not just about having a coffee with finance or sales or whatever. It's also about understanding their point of view on the subject. For example, this person really worked with finance to build a business case for certain sustainability investments. And something that was really key there is they have hundreds and thousands of products. It's to understand what the gross margin is on each product, so they can understand how big the sustainability impact is on certain products. And maybe some products are more able to take the hits because they have such a wide gross margin, for example, to leverage sustainability investments than others can. For example, if it's like raw material acquisition or changing of processes to make this product, maybe some products are more apt to receive this because they have a larger gross margin than others. And that was really a finance sales insight that sustainability didn't think of, that maybe we should direct investments where there is most room to take a hit, for example, on certain products. That being said, let us maybe move to the second use case, which is the use case I think I hear the most, which is supply chain risk / resilience. These two aspects have to do with one another. Could you tell me a bit more, Karine, Andries, of a case of supply chain disruption and what you do or what is important here to measure ROI?
Okay. It's yeah, as you said, Martin, supply chain. I often talk to people, to companies, and then you see that sometimes they have risk management systems, sometimes not. It depends on the size of the company. The bigger the company, usually the more corporate, the more they are aware of risk management and the more professional they are in risk management, the smaller the company. And it's very important not to overkill it. So it should be at the proper size of the company. I would not like to burden a company that is really small with a big book of risk analysis. I mean, that's not useful, but it's very, what is useful is to check scenarios. And to monitor trends. And then we immediately get back to strategy. What is your company strategy? What market are you in? What is your business strategy? And what are the trends that are important for your business? 5 years ago, I would be laughed at if I would have said that the interest rate would go up very drastically, because we were having almost 0%. Although I told some of my customers that they should take it into account, but it was not, all the trends showed the other way. So it's very important to monitor trends, to discuss, to talk with your customers, and to challenge your trend analysis with scenarios. And one of these scenarios should be climate change. Also, geopolitical issues can arise. What if at a certain moment, just say something, Poland would mobilize? The war with Russia and Ukraine escalates and Poland decides to mobilize because they feel the risk is too big. It's a big country and a lot of workers in Europe. So if they mobilize, probably a lot of Polish people will go back to Poland or will it will have an impact on your employees. So all these risks are intertwined, they are connected, and it's important at the proper size of the company to manage these risks, to know these risks. And as you said, Maarten, not only the flooding in Belgium learned that you can insure certain things, also you have to reassure your people, and then we come back to talent. You have to reassure people that in case something happens, you will be there as an engaged employer.
All right.
And also some other example that we saw, because risk management is often perceived as it's something for very big companies, like you gave the example at the beginning, Maarten, companies with factories or plants
Coca-Cola, yeah,
around the world. But it's also relevant for SMEs, and I'll give you an example why. So it's one of the same clients that we discussed a couple of minutes ago. It's a production company. So they make stuff for the construction industry. And we asked, okay, do you have a risk register related to climate risks? And that can be flooding, that can be blackouts, for example. And I'm going to zoom in on that second one. We asked, okay, what happens if there would be a blackout? What if the production hall is not running for like 6 hours or 10 hours or even a day? And they had no clue. They had no clue. And this is for an SME. Yeah? So what we did together is to make, we really investigated what would be the cost of having a blackout of 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours? Would it be reasonable to also install batteries or, to make sure that production can keep running? And yeah, sometimes the answer will be no, sometimes the answer will be yes, but at least it's a good thing that you think about it and that you know what the financial implications are if something like that happens. And this is also very relevant for SMEs.
I'll maybe pick in on this because I have very, very specific examples for this as well. And these are not my customers, so I can speak about this very plainly. When we're talking about supply chain, I think energy prices and fluctuations is something that is very clear, not only for your own energy expenditure, but because it will compound in your supply chain. If these people have to pay more for all certain raw materials, certain logistics will increase in price, obviously. But I think a good example here is I think a lot of F&B companies, agricultural companies, beverage companies, for example, are faced with this problem. And the guy from, I think, Royal Canin or Mars said it best. The best thing about and the worst thing about climate change is that the climate is changing and that we can actually see it. So where in the past 5-10 years ago, people had to say like, the possibility of a drought will create a scenario that we need to source our crops that we normally get from France, that we need to get them from China. And this will, if we model it, will cost us tens of millions of euros, right? Now, today, there are many examples of droughts and floods that create this problem of, now I need to go sourcing from somewhere else, which costs a lot more, which makes it a lot easier. It's unfortunate, but it makes it a lot easier to make the business case of the replacement costs for crops, which can only come, or these types of crops, which can only come from the rainforest belt, from the tropical forests or related regions. These are the replacement costs, which will drive our bottom line down if we are not able to invest in regenerative agriculture, find diversification in where we source from. So supply chain risk, I think, of all the pillars for growth is, I think, the most tangible one, because there's many different examples right now which you can use to really build that business case. And I think Andries and Karine, you said it well. There was also a question, what models, etc. I'll come back to that in the Q&A section. But I think the real answer is that you need to really understand your business and where your exposure lies on your raw materials, on where you purchase from, to really understand how prone or how vulnerable you are in your supply chain to certain risks. And I think that is really important when talking about ROI and resilience from supply chain. Which brings me to the third use case, which is access to green financing. Now, there's also a question which I will come back to later, that there's a lot of talk about green financing. It's also a lot of companies having difficulty finding green financing. I have great examples of green financing, so I love it that we can talk about this today. So maybe can you start us out, Andries and Karine, talking a little bit more about green financing? Okay, what is the case there, and maybe what is stopping or what makes it difficult today to access green financing?
Yes, it depends on the amount. If you are looking for a very small investment, let's say, to put a number on it, 50,000 euro, probably the bank will not be looking that much into sustainability. But if you are talking about millions of euros and even tens of millions of euros, it's a totally different story. Or hundreds of millions of euros. Let's start with the biggest amount, hundreds of millions of euro. Then it is very interesting to look at the European Investment Bank, because they are working on projects where sustainability is really a big thing. And then your interest of your loan is at a very low rate if your investment is sustainable. And makes, especially around climate, less on the S and the G of ESG, but on the E, environmental, it makes a lot of difference, and it can make hundreds of thousands of euros profit because you pay less interest for these kinds of amounts. If the amount is like 10 or 20 or 30 million euro, so less than 100 million euro, it is still very interesting to discuss it with your bank. Because the interest rate will be lower. If you discuss it with your account manager, there are sustainability linked loans, SLL, And most of the banks in Belgium, I think all of the banks in Belgium have SLLs. It depends, of course, about the criteria. If your banks work clever people. If your sustainability is merely a marketing story, then probably they will not buy it. But if you really, if it's solid, your sustainability of your project, then the banks will can connect this to an SLL, and internally you will have less interest rates, or a longer grace period could be a possibility. So that means that only after 1 year or 2 years you have to start repaying the capital, and you only have to pay interest. You will have better conditions. That is what I want to put on the table. There are some niche banks like Triodos and VDK Bank in Ghent. VDK gives attractive conditions, profitable conditions, also for smaller amounts. So it is interesting to talk to these different banks, Triodos as well, to include it, niche banks, and to discuss it with your banks. But again, the sustainability has to be real of the project. If it is not real, then the banks will probably not buy it.
Yes, and I think also a takeaway, Karine, from the projects that we did, guiding and negotiating really between or with companies towards the banks, is that it's very important that you also put it on the table actively as a company. And not just do some quick research on the website of the bank, but also bring in scope what could be or what are the sustainable elements of your projects, and really put them on the table very bluntly, very actively in the negotiations with the banks.
Is what you said, Andries, before. Salespeople sometimes are not, they don't have the lip loading, they don't address it themselves. And here at the bank side, sometimes they don't put it at the table spontaneously. So it's very important that you address it very explicitly. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll maybe caveat this as well. I think the example of companies today already struggle, the sustainability teams already struggle today in companies to convince and inform their salespeople. But the same thing happens at banks. Obviously, banks are very complex and broad organizations. Depending on the portfolios they have, they might have different AVDK, Triodos might have different strategies related to sustainability. Even these companies, mega companies, really struggle with how do I inform the agent or whoever is the financial advisor to be aware of all these possibilities. And I think, and this is something I'll relate a bit from my conversation with Rabobank a couple of days ago, what is really important is also a bank chooses priorities based on their exposure. They have GHG accounting that links their investments as their footprints, but then proportionally to investments they make. And she said to me, like, yeah, okay, the exposure is really important here because you can only do so many things. So maybe depending on what type of industries this bank generally supports or where they see the most gain to be made in certain fields, for example, they will focus on that. And that doesn't mean they don't want to help on other aspects, but they have a clear focus for sustainability financing within their bank, which might not overlap with what your industry does or what your problem has. So it's as much about really thinking about what do I want investments in and what bank can help with that. So they really can help you with, we don't really support agricultural projects, for example. We only do bio-based or we work in manufacturing, but only these types of products, that you can really go shopping in a way for the bank that actually has support for these types of systems. And I think there was a question from...
There is another one, Martin. Before we address the question, I want to nuance what you are saying, if you allow me. Also, it's very important to build trust and trusted relationship with your standard banks, because building the trust, not shopping can be a strategy, but sometimes it's good to address it with your standard banks because they have the relationships and they will know. That's all I want to say. If you are only shopping, it's not always a good strategy because now you get the lowest margin here. And sometimes it's also important to invest because if your investment request is not that very attractive, but the bank knows you for years, then there's a good chance they will still go for it because they know you and they know that you are solid.
Yes, exactly. And I think the shopping aspect has more to do with gaining information of what
Yes,
what banks
exactly.
support
Yes.
what's more than it is about shopping. And the thing I was saying about the comment, so this person, Don Busse, my screen is cutting off your first name. He said that, okay, it's hard for us to see what Belgian banks actually talk about sustainability and which programs they have running. And I do want to relate that maybe before I go to the other two questions, a little bit to something I've learned recently and what Karine says here as well. Sometimes you need to be big enough, but being big enough is not just saying that, you know, SMEs can't access financing. It can also mean that it maybe needs to be more collaborative within either your supply chain, your customers, your suppliers, or maybe even competitors. Because I'll give an example of this in the apparel industry, in the fashion industry, for example, there is now this collective with H&M and Gap and Mango, etc., where they do collective financing with ASBC to provide these green loans or to Bangladesh and India to make these investments. So even there, you see these collaborations within sectors or industries to then, because they source from the same manufacturers, they source from the same textile plants, etc., to set up this collective financing to then provide these very small companies, maybe in India and Bangladesh, with the investments they are looking for. And I think there are many initiatives coming from industries or maybe within value chains to maybe do collective financing to then solve certain sustainability, especially when we're talking about scope 3, certain sustainability investments. Now, let me go maybe to the final two questions which were posed. I'll start with Susan, since she posed a question in the beginning and it relates, Andries, Karine, to what you said in the past. Do you have an insight on the industries or sectors that have identified ROIs from their sustainability actions? So this relates a bit to the study you published. Were there certain trends with regards to industries or maybe some clear ROIs related to industries?
I would say if Susan, can I answer, Andries?
Yeah, go ahead.
If Susan reaches out to us, we can always send her the link to the study. It was not a study we have done. It was a research study from Nijrode University in the Netherlands. So we can always give her a copy of the document because it's a public study.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
All
and a
right.
very tangible example that we can give from experience is related to the green financing. And so we see that in the construction industry, for example, the green financing is typically the most important lever that they can handle to get the real ROI.
Mm-hmm. And from my conversation the last week, I think supply chain risk and supply chain resilience is, especially when we're talking about the industries, either agricultural products, everything that sources from the rainforest belt, tropical belt, and anything that has very wide range logistics that have to float through certain straits or have to go through certain passes, which are very, very geopolitically tense. Yeah, these types of industries have major exposure in their supply chain. So that is where the risk for them often also sits, or the ROI which can be gained. And then the third comment, which comes from Anton Gonissen. Apart from ways to make sustainability financially profitable, would you have knowledge of methodologies that measure this as ROI? So the methodologies to calculate ROI. Are there certain standards, certain frameworks that are very much known, or how would you answer this, Karine, Andries?
Yes, typically the IFRS, so the standard financial reporting is something that we, of course, follow, and we discuss it with the financial departments of our customers. We have our methodologies to calculate this, and we have the financial expertise. It really depends on which, on the company size again, on the reporting requirements. And this is what the kind of service that we offer to our customers, that is offering the methodology to calculate these things.
Mm-hmm. All right.
That is precisely what we are doing. That is our business.
All right, really interesting. And then maybe, since that was the last question, I'll have a last question of my own. Andries, Karine, you are in this business for quite some time. You have quite some experience with all these different business cases. Maybe could you tell me a bit more holistically, where are companies really struggling with the ROI aspect? Is it they don't have the knowledge? Is it they struggle with the data? Is it they don't have the resources? For you, could you tell me a bit more? What is the major problem when establishing ROI?
Yes, also I took the liberty of writing down some key takeaways to also provide the people with to take into the weekend. So first of all, yeah, it's all those things that you just mentioned. We also help companies by collecting the data, automating the data, to have it in the strategy, to also have the leverage internally, because that's very important. If some people in the management don't like sustainability, no way that something big is going to happen. So I think I found 4 takeaways, I think, from this webinar that you can write down or just put into your memory, that are answering the question, are you boosting EBITDA by applying sustainability in a way that makes sense financially, right? Because that's the main question that we try to answer. First check that you can do is like, first of all, how does sales handle sustainability towards customers? Do they have the correct lip loading to put sustainability on the table? And is there a correct customer segmentation? If the answer is no, you know that you have a big opportunity there. Second one, it's not always a good sign if you have a separate sustainability strategy. So it's a good idea to assess if this sustainability strategy, which should be just a normal strategy, if it's robust, and how it can be integrated into the normal strategy so that sustainability KPIs as such just vaporize and they just become KPIs. Second one, and that's really SME focused on, do you know what happens and what's the financial impact when there is a flood or a drought or when there is an electricity blackout? Do you know that what's going to happen then and what the financial impact is when production is just not running for a certain amount of time? It's the third one. And the fourth one, if you are doing quite some financing, and we see this in the construction industry mainly, but also in certain other industries where they buy just big machines and stuff like that. Are you profiting already from sustainability-linked loans or from projects with the EIB towards through your banks? And do you have an idea how to get lower interest on your loans? Because if not, it's something that you should put on the table actively towards your banks. And I think that kind of summarizes everything that we said into 4 takeaways that you can apply on Monday.
All right. Thank you very much, Andries. I'll maybe add a little bit to the third one. And this was the guy from L'Oréal who said it. If you want to sell it to finance, be able to pinpoint as a sustainability person where on the P&L your decision will hit, and not just it will save in raw material acquisition, but actually at what time, from what suppliers, if you can make it, because finance people are very precise people. Yeah. If you can really define where these investments will hit, not on a high level scale, but on a very detailed view for them, it will be much easier to talk their language and get them on board. Having said that, we are at the last couple of minutes for the webinar. I want to start out with thanking Andries and Karine for being here today and giving us a wealth of knowledge on ROI and how to establish it. I also want to quickly paraphrase ResultX and ClimateCamp work together on many different aspects, but where we know nothing about ROI and getting this business case solved, we only do scope 3 data and improving emissions data quality. There we work together with ResultX and other partners to actually establish the business case for these investments. So leaving on that note, I wish everybody a good weekend. I hope it stays great weather and nobody melts. And I will thank everybody here present today for joining us. You will get the recording and other information afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, have a nice weekend. Yeah, bye-bye.